They just want more blood. Like, they're bloodthirsty. Like, they can't wait to keep more men in the meat grinder. Or somebody brought up the 94 treaty with Ukraine and the U.S. that we were to support them if they gave up their nukes. And I said, the problem is that the ink wasn't even dry on the treaty, and the oligarchs and the gangsters were trying to sell nuclear submarines and nuclear missiles to anybody that would fucking pick up the tab. And that broke the treaty. The treaty it didn't even last a year. But we still held up our end. They never held up their end. We had to force them. We literally, remember, we sent peacekeepers into Ukraine, 95, 6, whatever, to make sure that they actually, that's right, the Budapest Treaty, that's correct, actually put those nukes into, or sent the nukes to Russia. And it was just really disingenuous because they use that, they only tell you part of the story, right? And they're like, well, there's a treaty. Well, if they don't abide by the treaty, is there a treaty? Why are we upholding our end? They didn't uphold their end. They were literally, and so the first thing Wick goes is like, you got a citation on that? And I'm like, I'm not going to go look back at 1994.
Well, even that, like, if you read, I have to do more research on this, but if you look at that 94 agreement, it's very vague in what defending means. It's almost...
It says support.
Right. And so, like, there's nothing really written that says if there's a physical invasion, like, what occurs. There's all sorts of problems with this as well, like, are we talking about the people of Ukraine or the leadership of Ukraine? For example, if I could show evidence that the leadership of Ukraine was supporting the Azov battalion that was killing ethnic Russian-speaking people in, say, 2019, were we obligated to defend those Russian-speaking people? Or is it just that we're obligated to defend the government of Ukraine from outside incursions? Because Russia also signed that agreement, right? So then does Russia... If Russia thinks that we engaged in the coup, the Maidan revolution, to overthrow the government of Ukraine, are they obligated to intervene because they view the United States as an outside aggressor, funding people that are committing active violence and a violent overthrow of the government, right? When it gets right down to it, it's sort of, well, it was an implicit agreement. I don't disagree with the mentality of that. You give up your nukes, we'll make sure people don't fuck with you. The problem was, as soon as you go back previous 3 years to that in 1991, where the United States had this implicit agreement to the Soviet Union, listen, if you dissolve the Soviet Union, we won't expand westward or eastward, right?
Correct.
With NATO, what they say is, yeah, but that wasn't written down in a treaty. That wasn't written down. It was just a verbal comment. It was never memorialized in a treaty. Well, the same could be said of the 94 nuclear agreement as well. So the truth is, and then you get into other things, like, for example, what if Ukraine decided that they were just going to bomb the shit out of, like, Belarus, and then Belarus fights back? Are we treaty obligated to defend Ukraine in that situation? That's one of the problems, by the way, with this idea of a security guarantee, right? If we would give what Zelensky's suggesting, right? Let's say we give in and we say, okay, a precursor to peaceful negotiations and a ceasefire with Russia is Russia knowing that no matter what, the NATO umbrella now extends over Ukraine. So once this conflict is over, if there's ever an invasion by Russia to Ukraine again, you've basically now gone to war with all of NATO, okay? Let's say that occurs. Now, am I the only person that remembers the following two events? The bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline, which now the official narrative is it was Ukraine. My money's still on U.S. intelligence or Western intelligence. Nonetheless, the official story is it's Ukraine, but Ukraine denied it for like months, right? And then remember when Poland got a missile dropped on them? You remember that? And Zelensky came out and was like, oh my God, that was Russia. And you had all these people go, oh, that's an act of war now.
It's true.
NATO. That's an act of war against NATO. We got to trigger Article 5. And then it turned out it wasn't Russia. It was Zelensky. It was Ukraine. So if we enter this security guarantee, what's to stop some sort of attack from happening in Ukraine that ends up not being from Russia, but Zelensky says, yeah, it was Russia. Now you got to go to war. And what's to stop our intel agencies that have wanted a proxy war with Russia for the past 2 decades from saying, yep, that's the truth? When you stop and think about it, what do we really know? right? And when you see obvious bullshit that they're lying about, like remember when Biden came out and said, if Russia would invade, then that Nord Stream pipeline will stop. And they were like, what do you mean it'll stop? Like, I'm just telling you it'll stop. Then Russia invades and the pipeline gets blown up. And the United States, Biden administration's like, of course, it's a conspiracy theory to even suggest we had anything to do with it. So like, what do you really know? Like, what does all of these people you're on the panel with, what do they really know about what's going on in Ukraine right now? Right? I'll be the first to admit, I don't know what to believe. I see videos of press gangs beating the shit out of men and throwing them in black vans, and I'm told that's Zelensky's team beating the shit out of people to force them to go fight in the front. Maybe that's true. But then the other side says, no, Zelensky's massively popular, 70 to 80% approval. Everybody loves him. We had a story today that turned out to be nothing that's been confirmed, but there's a story out there that apparently part of the rolling back of the Biden administration's refugee status would make eligible for 250,000 Ukrainians to be sent back to Ukraine, right? And you see all these people on the left that are gnashing their teeth and howling, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we're at the early stages of that. It's just being talked about. Maybe there'll be a cutout for Ukrainians. Who knows? But it didn't stop the pro-Ukrainian people from freaking out, as always. My question is, okay, let's take women and children out of it. How many of those 250,000 are fighting-age men? Right? Weren't they all drafted? So
that's an interesting point. Yeah.
And so wait a minute.
They weren't allowed to leave. They couldn't cross the border.
That's right. People that committed crimes against Zelensky's government by illegally leaving the country will now be sent back. Is that the story here? And I thought everyone in Ukraine wanted the war. So why are there people fleeing? I thought they wanted to fight to the last man. Women and children, fine. I understand that argument. But the men why should we be supporting them leaving? Isn't the good pro-Ukrainian thing to do to say, get your ass back there and grab a rifle? So that logically, they just accept this hook, line, and sinker. But Russia's evil, and you're pro-Putin if you're not for literally contributing to this endless war. Like, if it's really a moral imperative that we stop Russia now, then why don't these people suggest United States and NATO boots on the ground? Why not? Why are we just giving them enough to make sure Ukrainians die by scores?
I had a great experience watching that pentuplet guy and average debate enjoyer.
They're good. Both of them are good.
Those two were literally, and myself, of course, were literally telling all the lefties that they just want more blood. Like, they're bloodthirsty. Like, they can't wait to keep more men in the meat grinder. Right? Like, they just can't wait. They get a gleam in their eye, and we're like, you guys are like terrible. You're war hawks. And no, we're not. No, we're not war hawks.
Everything they say, it like contradicts. Like, I saw today, lefty people, I can't remember who it was, that were like, oh, like, now there are people saying that, like, NATO, that if NATO was there, that would stop Russia, but it wouldn't, because Trump would just not do anything anyways. He wouldn't trigger it. Okay, then what's the claim with the security guarantee then? Because basically your argument is, even if Trump would agree to a security guarantee, he would violate it anyways. So Russia's not going to give a shit, and they're going to consider it. Then I saw someone write a big thread on about how actually Russia's a bunch of sissies. Trump's under the impression that they're these real tough guys, but actually their economy's falling apart and the military shit. Then you're like, oh, okay. Well, then I guess the claim they're going to storm through Europe if they take over Ukraine is bullshit. No. They're just in the Goldilocks scenario where they're weak enough that we never have to worry about it as long as we continue to send money to Ukraine forever and allow Ukrainian men to die. But if we stop that, then they're strong enough to take over the entirety of Europe. Isn't that what a claim? And it's constantly this bullshit where they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. Like, I talked to Dylan Burns, who is on the ground there and probably knows more about the on-the-ground situation than me, although it's coming from what I would say is a biased place. Nonetheless, he told me that at best, if Ukraine falls, Russia may get into Moldova. That was his claim. But simultaneously, I watched Lindsey Graham on television saying, we have to fight them over there so we don't fight them over here. Well, Moldova's not over here. So what is this claim? And they really don't have an answer.
Well, I got to talk to you about. We'll get to that in just a minute. But before we do, let me ask you, man, seriously, why is nobody talking about the fact that if and only if Russia could do something and actually take over, totally defeat and occupy Ukraine? Let's just say that could happen. Why is nobody talking about that they'd have to deal with Poland? And Poland is armed to the teeth. It is literally like it's Texas it's European Texas right now.
They wouldn't go into Poland. Everybody knows it. They know it.
Nobody's going to go into Poland,
Right.
bro. like Poland's the gatekeeper, right? Like they try and come out of Ukraine, Poland's right there. They'd be like, no, you can't do it.
To steel man their position, it would go something like this. Well, once they take over Ukraine and all of the Western world decides to just allow it, then they'll build up their military for the next 20, 30 years. And then they'd be able to get, that's what the argument, but it's a joke. Everybody knows it's not the case.
Everybody knows, I mean, like, I think your chat's right that the leftists can't point to Poland on a map.
They couldn't. They couldn't. And I don't consider myself to be geographically amazing, but I looked this up one day. I was like, what were the nearest like military bases with missiles from the Western world to Russia at the time of the invasion? And I forget, it was like 110 miles where there was a Western military base with like missiles. And it's like, you think about that. Imagine just on the other side of the Rio Grande, like China's got a base there with missiles. We don't have to imagine. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis.